My husband left me when I was pregnant, and I worked as a waitress to pay my bills. It was a cold Thursday afternoon when my world first shattered. The air outside felt heavy, thick with the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. And yet, I didn't realize at that moment that my life was about to be torn apart. At that time, David and I had been together for 4 years, and we had plans. Big plans. Or at least I thought we did. I was 5 months pregnant. I remember that day so vividly, sitting on our worn-out couch, my hands resting on my growing belly, feeling the little flutters of our baby inside me. It felt like the start of a new chapter, one filled with excitement, hope, and dreams of our little family. But David had other plans. He sat down across from me, his face pale, his eyes avoiding mine. I remember his hands, normally so steady, trembling as he spoke. "Sarah, we need to talk." Those words should have been a warning, but I didn't want to see the signs. I smiled, thinking he had something nice to say. Maybe he had just planned a surprise for me, something to lift my spirits. I had been tired, as any pregnant woman would be, and he had promised he would do whatever it took to make me feel supported. But as the words tumbled out of his mouth, it was as if my whole world began to crumble. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What do you mean you can't do this?" "I'm leaving, Sarah. I don't want to be a father. I don't want this life. I don't want to be married anymore. I'm done." I froze. The words echoed in my ears, bouncing around in my mind, but they didn't make sense. How could he be leaving now, when we were about to become parents? How could he walk away when we had planned for this baby together? I felt the tears welling up, but I couldn't bring myself to cry. "Not yet. David, no. Please, this isn't you. This isn't us. We've been through so much together. We can get through this." My voice shook as I pleaded with him, but he didn't even look at me. His eyes were distant, as if he had already checked out emotionally. Long before that moment, he stood up slowly, his back turned to me. I reached out to him, desperate, but he pulled away. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I don't love you anymore. I can't stay in this marriage. I don't want this life." And with that, he walked out. I heard the door slam behind him, the sound echoing through the silence of our apartment. I collapsed onto the couch, clutching my belly as the reality of the situation hit me. I was pregnant, alone, and completely heartbroken. The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't even breathe properly. I was terrified. Terrified of being alone. Terrified of raising this child by myself. I kept asking myself, how could he leave me? How could he leave us? But every question I had went unanswered. David was gone, and there was no reason, no closure. He just left. I tried to reach out to him a few times, but he wouldn't respond. No matter how many texts I sent, no matter how many voicemails I left, it was as if I had become a stranger to him. The first few weeks were the hardest. I spent most of my time crying, hiding away in our apartment, not wanting to face the world. But the reality of being a single mother was fast approaching. My belly was growing, and I knew that soon I would be holding my baby, my little one, who deserved the best. But how could I give them the best when I was struggling to even stand? I had no choice but to pull myself together. I couldn't afford to dwell in grief. I had to start figuring out how to survive. I knew my savings wouldn't last long. I had no family nearby, and I had no real career prospects. I had always been a stay-at-home partner, focusing on making our little apartment feel like home, while David worked. But now, with him gone, I needed to find a way to pay the rent and cover my growing list of expenses. I started applying for jobs, but without any formal qualifications, things weren't looking promising. Day after day, I got rejection after rejection. Every time I thought I'd found something, it slipped away. But one day, as I was walking down the street, I saw a small, locally owned diner with a help wanted sign in the window. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I walked in, filled out an application, and within a couple of hours, I was hired as a waitress. I won't lie, the first day on the job was hard, really hard. My pregnancy had me feeling sluggish, my back ached from standing for long periods, and the nausea never seemed to ease up. But I had no choice. I needed to make this work, for my baby, for myself. Every day I woke up early, put on my apron, and went to the diner, serving food and drinks with a smile that didn't always match how I felt inside. It was grueling work. I was on my feet for hours, running around the restaurant, juggling plates, and refilling cups, all while trying to ignore the exhaustion and the tears that threatened to spill out. The other waitstaff were kind, but I could tell they didn't really understand. Many of them were young and single, living carefree lives. They didn't have the weight of a baby growing inside them, reminding them every minute of the responsibility they were about to take on. I didn't mind the work, though. It kept me busy. And being busy was the only thing that kept my mind off the pain. One night, as I was refilling a customer's coffee cup, a man at the counter caught my eye. He was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He had been coming into the diner regularly for months, always sitting at the same spot. We exchanged pleasantries whenever he came in, but that night, he said something that changed everything. "You know," he said as I placed his coffee in front of him, "I can tell you're going through something, but I want you to know. You're doing a great job. You're working hard, and I see you. Keep going." His words stuck with me. At the time, I didn't know how much I needed to hear that, but I did. They were the first real words of encouragement I had gotten in months. And for the first time since David left, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could do this. As the weeks passed, I adjusted to the rhythm of the diner. It was tough, but I became more resilient. The exhaustion became part of my routine. I would work, go home to Emily's apartment, where I was living temporarily, and collapse into bed. Emily, bless her heart, took care of me during those difficult months, offering me a space to rest, to recharge, and even to cry when I needed to. She became my lifeline. I was no longer alone, and that made all the difference. The pregnancy itself was challenging, but I learned to cope. Emily was there for the late-night cravings, the endless doctor's appointments, and the emotional roller coaster that came with being pregnant and heartbroken. She never once judged me for my tears or my frustration. And then, one evening, the pain started. I was at work when my contractions began. At first, I thought it was just normal pregnancy discomfort, but as the minutes passed, I realized I was in labor. Emily rushed to pick me up from the diner, and we made our way to the hospital in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Hours later, I held my baby girl in my arms. My heart swelled as I looked into her tiny face. She was perfect. The pain, the struggle, the heartache, all of it faded away in that moment. This was what mattered. This was what I had fought for. The road after that wasn't easy. I had to balance work, caring for my newborn, and keeping up with the demands of life. But every day I became stronger. I learned that I was capable of things I never thought possible. And when the bills piled up and the exhaustion nearly broke me, I would hold my daughter, feeling her warmth, and I would push through. 2 years later, I received a letter from David. He apologized, said he had changed, and that he wanted to be a part of our daughter's life. But by then, I didn't need him. I had built a life without him, and it was a life that was full of love, strength, and resilience. I didn't need validation from anyone, least of all the man who had walked away when I needed him most. So, I wrote back, "We're doing just fine. I'm doing just fine. I don't need you anymore. And with that, I closed the door on that chapter of my life. I wasn't broken anymore. I was stronger than ever, and as I looked into the eyes of my daughter, I knew that no matter what the future held, I would always be enough. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.